What does £59 get you at the minute? Well, about 7.5 pints of Guinness at Manchester Piccadilly train station, or 3 double cheeseburgers with fries and a drink from Five Guys via Deliveroo, or ridiculously accurate studio monitoring. If you're used to working on the road or at home in a fairly untreated room, you'll know how hard it is to really nail mix downs. And for many of us, headphone mixing has become something that we've had to rely on. Now, normally you've seen me on videos with things like this, or there's these LCD 5 at £4,000. Headphones. Now they're about £1,250. But today we're going to look at something that's £59. And these are AKG's K361s. Now, they were always the younger brother of the K371, which is admittedly a bit of a better headphone, but it's also twice the price, because now at 59 quid, these really could be the secret for you to nail some mix downs, because the frequency response as standard is pretty good. And I'm going to give you the EQ curve that you can implement in any multi-band parametric EQ, and to really nail that down in the terms of tonal balance. Now, it's not going to have the detail of the Odysseys or the heads and the separation, but what it is going to do is get you that balance. And realistically, that is the majority of the work. If you can nail the frequency response and your tonal balance and get that right, then your mix downs are really going to benefit and translate. Now, let's start off with a little bit about target curves. So, if we put this up, you can see here that the area from about 1k up to 10k is risen, and this is for ear gain. That's the effect that your ear is having on your hearing, and this is generally what many of the studio headphones are matched to, especially the planar magnetic ones, where it's really hard to get an elevated bottom end. But it does mean that you don't get that sort of visceral feeling of bass that you generally get with speakers, you know, especially with how much of it hits your body in the sub octaves rather than just hitting your eardrum. Whereas this, again, this top end here was developed, the curve was developed by Dr. Sean Olive as part of his 2018 study. However, the preferred listening curve in that study was actually that. So you can see there's quite a difference in the bottom end. In fact, it's about 6 dB. And to my ears, as a studio engineer, it's just not right. It's way above the level that we'd mix at. It's certainly above the level that you consider flat in the studio. However, he also did a study in 2013, and that was using members of AKG staff who, admittedly, they were all working at AKG, and they were generally quite a bit more trained listeners than the ones used in the 2018 study, which were more general public. So if we do something a little bit sneaky here and combine the two curves, so we've got the top end from the 2018 and the low end from the 2013 study, you can see that it shelves off, and that's this green line that's come up here, and it is about right to me. I think it's the absolute happy point of getting you slightly elevated sub bass for you to be able to monitor with, and it just replicates what you're missing at the eardrum for what you feel through your body. So there, that's where we're going to match to today. That's going to be our target curve. But let's start off and have a look at the K361 and in its raw state. So I'll add that over the top now. And as you can see, it actually matches that red line fairly closely. This is snaking round it little bit of a dip here, a little bit above here. You've got this little scoopy region here, but I'll come back to that in a second, and then fairly tightly through all of the treble. And this is pretty much ideal if you're listening. But where this does get fairly interesting is that apart from this little peak here at about 140, it does actually sort of match up this green line here in the 100 to 60 hertz region. This stepped bass response is actually really ideal, because if you are making acoustic music with acoustic drums and bass, then below 60 hertz there's not normally all that much going on. It's all in that 100 to 60 region, and that's really even. So even in its raw state, this response could be good for a wide range of different music types. This is a great response, especially if we consider some of the other closed-back headphones. So let's look at the Austrian Audio X55, again, designed by ex-AKG staff. And you can see there, I'll just turn that neutral one off, how well actually this is doing, because X55 follows it a bit, but you've got this huge chasm in the sort of 1 to 3K region, and there's a good bit of bobbling throughout the rest of it. Even something like Beyer's DT990 Pro, which is quite a popular studio choice, just over £100, you know, that's coming in, and it's nowhere near. You can see it sort of follows through here. It drops right off in the sub-bass region, but it's this top end response, so 10K plus, where it's ridiculously loud. And certainly you can totally hear this in a headphone, and EQing that down means you lose detail, and it's just not that much of a pleasant experience. Strangely, their own DT770 actually does a lot better. But yes, there's a dip here. We kind of expect that. It's a close back. But where this headphone massively falls down is here. 100 hertz and 200 hertz. Both with significant dips and very tight dips. If you're going to have a change in frequency on a headphone, you want it to be smooth and long rather than tight and compact. And the lower the frequency that it is, the more important and significant that dip will be. In this case, it just means it eats kick drums and the harmonic. So the first harmonic of 100 hertz is 200 hertz, and you can see there kick drums generally hit somewhere around 100, and then 200 is the first harmonic, and it's just sapped. It's like there's a chasm. So it just shows you actually how good the K361s are. Even something like Sennheiser's HD600. So let's pop that up. Matches beautifully through the mid-range, a little bit over on the sort of 3K region, but the sub-bass rolls off significantly again, so it's not one, especially for the electronic producers, to really be writing and vibing with. Even new models at more than twice the price, like Rhodes NTH 100, struggle in some regions, because here you can see it does fairly well throughout all of the mid-range, and then as it gets to 1K and into the upper mid, it's, you know, lacking slightly there, and that, you know, that could be down to personal preference and stuff, but where you really notice it is here. So in the 7 to 10K region, there's just this big gap, and it loses all of the treble detail, and you've got to go and really EQ that up and bring that back up, because it just sort of hi-hat positioning becomes a lot more difficult. So let's go back to the K361, and I'm going to show you where we've managed to get to using a EQ, and we're going to rebalance it to that. So there's still a little bit of a dip here in the sort of 3 to 5k region, because you trying to push it much more, you end up bringing out the other sides of it, or using such a tight band that you can really hear a resonant peak. I think this is the best point that we can get to without you really hearing it on the EQ. If you are going to have a dip in the frequency response, then 3 to 5k is exactly where you do want it, because based on the head related transfer function, or HTRF, you're super sensitive at that point, and due to the anatomy of your head, literally how big it is, how big your ears are, and everything else, you're going to probably prefer a slight dip at that point, dependent if you've got a larger head. Now, if I'm talking to most musicians who are on the whole male and adult, then you are going to have a slightly more larger head than average, so you're probably not going to mind that dropping off very slightly there, and in fact it's probably a lot more comfortable for you. Now you can see on the graph here it matches up really fairly closely to the green balanced line there, and it just gives us that lovely balanced tone that is going to enable you to do better, more accurate mixes. Where do you put this EQ? Well, it can either go on the end of your mix bus, but remember to turn it off before you print and export your project, because it's only right for your headphones, it won't be right for everyone else. Or it can go on your monitor bus if you've got one. Some things like Cubase and Nuendo, you can put plugins just on the monitor bus that then don't have the possibility of them getting printed with the song. You could also team this up with a little bit of crossfeed, which puts a bit of the right ear in the left cup and vice versa. It's not so essential with these because it isn't a super wide presentation like something like HD600. But if you were going to use something like Goodhertz Can Opener at this point, that could give you an extra little bit of accuracy in your mixing. Now, sometimes you just want to get on a bit of a vibe, especially when you're writing parts and not just mixing. You want that big bottom end if you're working on things like reggae, drum and bass, dubstep, and you want to really get those sub-octaves going through to kind of inspire you with those parts if you're working in headphones. So what I'll suggest at this point is having a second version of this curve that gives you that bit of writing vibe and brings back the heavy sub-octave. So just disable the bottom 3 EQ points, and then it gives you a graph much like that. So it evens out all throughout the mid-range into the high bass region, and in fact down to about 60 hertz. So it matches it there and then just kicks up that bottom end and gives you that lovely sub-octave really prominently, which is wonderful for really giving you some inspiring bottom end, a bit like a club system. Obviously turn that off again and go back to the other preset for doing your mix work. Don't forget, if you want special deals, be it on AKG or any other headphone mixing and studio kit, and you're in the UK, hit us up, scanproaudio at scan.co.uk with the code word that's on the bottom of the screen right now. In times like these, picking up a bargain is always welcome, and I think these, if you haven't got a set of headphones that you're mixing with, could be a secret weapon for your studio for 59 quid. I'll say it again, £59. It really isn't a lot to get something that's reliable mixing, even if you do most of the work on speakers and just come to the headphones at the final part. Although I'd be using it in a sort of an A/B fashion and using it throughout the mixing process. Just balance, do a bit more, go back onto speakers, go and do it in a hybrid form like that. I think this is super good. We're always, when we're trying and looking for headphones, you want something about sounds there without an EQ, and then with the EQ it's just the icing on the cake, and that's exactly what you've got here, but with that super bottom end that just gives you that bass vibe if you want it for writing, because sometimes boosting that up artificially really doesn't sound good, and in these headphones actually it's a case of just knocking it down, but because it's that bottom octave and not much higher bass, it's just everything works beautifully. I think these could be my bargain of the year for the studio. So if you are on a limited budget, this could be some of the best money you'll spend. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you for another video again soon.